Welcome, welcome, welcome to the School of Radiance podcast. I'm your host, a humble human on a mission, here to help you both look and feel your best. And of course, I get to benefit from all this information in the process as well. So sit tight, because in today's episode, we are going to be focusing on NAD and can it make you look and feel younger? Well, we went straight to the pros here in this regard. We went to Qualia. And Qualia has been a longtime supporter of the show. So thank you so much, Qualia, for your trust and support over the years. And of course, for making excellent products that I take every day and I love. And we're going to be focusing on NAD, why I love it. And if you're not currently on NAD, why you might want to consider it as a staple and a foundation in supporting your cellular wellness. Because really what ages us is metabolic dysfunction and inflammation. And we're going to get into the science of NAD, what it is, and how it can benefit you in both looking and feeling your best. Because newsflash, our skin cells have mitochondria, and NAD can help to support that function. So today we have joining us Dr. Dan Pardi. He is the Chief Health Officer at Qualia Life Sciences, where he leads education to advance health span and peak performance. He's the founder of humanOS.me and host of humanOS Radio. I'm very excited to hear his voice here. The official podcast of the Sleep Research Society. Dan has advised elite military units, Fortune 500 companies, and startups through his consultancy. Vivendi Health as well. He holds a PhD in Cognitive Neuroscience from Leiden University and Stanford, and speaks regularly at events like TEDx, VC firms, and the Institute for Human Machine Cognition. We're going to have a very fun show here today. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the show, Dr. Dan Pardi. How are you today? And of course, what is radiance to you?
Thank you so much for having me on, Rachel. It's so nice to meet you and get a chance to chat today. I'm doing great. Good question. So what is radiance to me? I think it is a wonderful indicator of health. It is, so we can think of health in very clinical terms, but we can also think of it in a way that is a je ne sais quoi, something that might be hard to capture, but you recognize it when you see it. And radiance is a term that reflects that health level. So someone is showing up to life with spirit and energy and personality. Their skin looks good. Their appearance looks good for their age. So we can look at somebody who is 14 years old and they have a peak of health in some ways, but we can also tell that someone is very healthy when they're 75. So we calibrate our own perspective on health based off of what we understand about the process of aging as we go through a lifespan. But you can tell radiance in a person at any age. So that's my take on radiance.
Love it. This whole history of lifespan and longevity, it's still pretty new. It goes back about 30 years to when the mitochondria first started to be studied, particularly in animal models. And now we're like, okay, what can we do as humans to look and feel our best and have the energy to show up in our life, in our relationships, with our families, and of course to live our purpose. It's really kind of like the key purposes that drives a lot of people in life. Walk us through, Dan, some of the pieces of history of mitochondrial study, longevity, and of course, really where the study of NAD actually came from.
Oh my gosh. So I love this question because it's actually something that I think I'm more excited about than the average bear. Where did it all begin? How did this process of life on Earth even begin? So if we go back to the beginning, this is how far we want to go back. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. And if you think about what it looked like then, it looked completely different. It was this molten lava surface, and it was constantly being bombarded by asteroids. And you would never think that it could sustain life at all. But it eventually cooled and a crust formed. And then we even had the beginning of oceans. And so that's where now it's starting to look a little bit more like a place that could hold life on Earth. And it contained an atmosphere that was also very different. So instead of being rich in oxygen, it was methane and ammonia and hydrogen. But energy then came from these lightning storms that we think is what built the first building blocks that then enabled life. And so we know that this was actually, there was a study that was done by, it's called the Miller-Urey experiment. It happened in 1952. And these two researchers at the University of Chicago, they simulated the early Earth conditions. And what they showed, so they made a chamber, and it was the exact atmosphere that they thought was present in the beginning. And then they used electric shocks to simulate lightning. And what they found is that within a week, we started to see the beginning of amino acids and other molecules that could be then used by the earliest forms of life. And so this entire field is called prebiotic chemistry. And NAD may have, this is obviously something we're going to be talking about today, but NAD is thought to be potentially one of those molecules that existed even before life itself, but that the earliest versions of life use those molecules to now then create new proteins and to start what the beginning of life look like. So that's how far we can go back to think about where this began. And if you think then about there's basically been 4 major epochs of human design. And the beginning was creating cells. And it took 3 billion years just to create really efficient cells that were so efficient and stable that more forms of life could be built. And in that time, that's when we first saw mitochondria inhabit another cell. This was called the great endosymbiotic event. So before, we had all these individual single cells, and it was the only time in the history of Earth that a protobacteria entered into another cell and then took residence, and then that changed everything. And that what we know of those today as mitochondria. So they enabled 1,000-fold increase in energy per gene, and that enabled 1 billion-fold increase in the size of cells. And only because that happened, now we could see new features like cells joining together and becoming multicellular organisms. Then that leading to bilateral symmetry, where we see a brain, we see the ability to move towards food, and all of that. We have 37 trillion cells in our body, and they look exactly like those cells did in the beginning of the origins of Earth. And so it's a fascinating topic, and it's ancient. It goes back to the beginning. So we have this ancient lineage inside of us, which is really pretty cool.
Well, I do love blending the ancient wisdom, TCM, Ayurveda, there's so many great practices that lead to the foundations of our health. And of course, our aura, our radiance, all that good stuff. And then we have this like smart cell that shows up. And I'm always super curious, like, what caused that? Why did that transformation, why did that shift? Why did that timestamp essentially happen? But now we're at a timestamp where we're looking for peak performance. And one of the things that I've observed in the biohacking and longevity space is that the first groups to look at how can we ensure that our operators are operating effectively. We see that in military, we see that in space exploration, and we also see it in CEOs. And now we have a whole group of people like you and I who are living our lives, and we simply desire to function in a great, beautiful, bright, happy, lifted way. And tell us how NAD can help us achieve just that. And just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I remember playing a computer game. I was a huge nerd growing up, and there was a StarCraft game. And you get to like build bases, and there's these little army dudes. And when you wanted them to go to battle and do really well, you would press on this little stim pack button.
Mm,
So would NAD be kind of like that, like this little like boost, something that we can
mm.
take to energize us, to allow us to flourish and really support our systems to operate in a high level way? Tell us how that works with NAD when we supplement it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So let's start with what it is. So the scientific explanation is that it is this coenzyme, and there is Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize, discusses the curse of knowledge. So when you're a scientist, you're so familiar with the terminology that you speak to it as though everybody understands that. It can happen in every field. Lawyers do it, and physicians do it. It happens everywhere. So, but it's really important here. So if this is a coenzyme, what is that? Let's take a second and look at that specifically, because it'll actually help with the rest of the discussion. So we're going to have a conversation around enzymes, coenzymes, and cofactors. Think of an enzyme like a machine in a workshop, and it makes a product. And a coenzyme is like a tool that the machine needs to do its job. Okay. And a cofactor is more like a part that the machine needs to run properly. So this helps to stabilize the machine's moving parts. So in this analogy, right, the machine is going to speed up any sort of chemical reaction. An enzyme is then a tool that the machine uses. And then a cofactor is a part of the machine, like a bolt. Okay. So these are what NAD is, a coenzyme, and there are really four of them that Charles Brenner, who's really a scientific leader in this space, refers to as the crown jewels of our metabolism. And a good way to think of NAD is like a battery. Okay. It's like an empty battery. And that doesn't sound good because we want our batteries to be full. But the reason why this is so useful is because it's a general purpose battery that helps to break things down and extract energy. So when we eat food, then it gets broken down, and it contains energy that we need to harness and move around. If we can't move that energy around, then our cells can't perform. All right. So that's what NAD is. And there are many, many different molecules in the body. In fact, there's a massive amount, and it's pretty staggering to think about the amount that there are. So we can actually look at that, because you get a sense of just how important this is just by the quantity. So a typical cell, there's about 100 to 500 million molecules of NAD. And each NAD molecule is participating in about 1,000 to 2,000 reactions per day on average. Okay. That means if you combine those numbers, that every cell is experiencing 2 billion NAD reactions a day. That's a ton. And now think about the fact that we have 37 trillion cells, that the number of NAD reactions that happen in the body is 10,000 times greater than all of the stars in the observable universe. Now, if that puts things in perspective, if that doesn't, then, so it is enabling a lot of things to happen. And if we didn't have NAD, the entire process would stop and we would die. We would die right away. So that is what it is and what it's doing and how much we have in the body. But the levels that we have do decline. And so when we're young, we have really a tremendous amount to help the body grow. And we have a peak level around the 10 to 20 years old. And this is going to support hormone levels and brain remodeling, puberty. Exactly. There's so much going on with a young person as they grow into their fully mature form, and there's multiple different stages of that. And we need a lot of NAD to make that happen. But then in the mid 30s, we we start to see a decline. And this decline is not something that you might feel right off the bat, because when you're in your 30s, you feel pretty robust, particularly if you've been taking care of yourself. But yes, scientists can detect an actual decline starting to happen. And so, it's about in your 30s, maybe 80% of what it used to be. So still enough to do a good job. By your 40s, you now have maybe 30 to 40% less than you did at your peak. And by your 50s, you actually have maybe half of the level of NAD molecules doing all of those important jobs. So you can see there's a pretty significant decline by midlife. And by midlife, that is when you can really, especially when you can see it, you see all the signs of aging starting to begin. They don't end in the mid 50s, but they're now very clear. You can see wrinkles in the skin. You might have less energy than you did before. You can see graying hair. You might not be as sharp as you were when you were younger in some ways. Other forms of sharpness and mental abilities continue to climb, actually, at this point in life. But the ill effects of less NAD are perceptible at this time of life.
Mm-hmm. And if we think about what's happening in 30s, 40s, people are starting to have their families. I was in two rough car crashes, like life stuff happens.
Yeah.
So not only do we have this physical decline of the circulating amount of NAD in our bodies that carry the hydrogen ions across that mitochondrial membrane to then make ATP, to turn that ATP piece of machinery so that we have energy. There's so many bits and pieces of what we're choosing to fuel our body that are going to other things, like muscle recovery when you start to lift weights, nervous system repair, dropping from sympathetic to parasympathetic. There's also for women the big shifts with perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. So there's always lots of things happening. And of course, staying on track with your purpose, with your vision, and all that. So you need to have the foundations of everything I talk about here on the show. And then once you're dialed in, you have that foundation. You start to add something into that to be supportive, and it can make a huge difference. And I know NAD has for me too. And so beyond the physical benefits, some people say NAD can also shift our energetic frequency, think output, right? Think that increased joule output, which is measurable with something I have called the BioWell, and that can enhance our inner radiance. So how do you see NAD supporting not just cellular repair, but also that overall vibrancy of the aura, which we can measure with the BioWell and literally the joule output of the body? The clarity of mind piece that you mentioned is of particular interest for me. Cognitive function, being able to be present, is showing love, and just overall energetic presence. What's your take on that? What have you observed in your own life or discussion with others in how their life gets better when they start to increase their NAD levels?
It's always interesting to look at what's happening in the cell, but what we really care about is how it shows up to affect the way that we live. A doctor might say, what are the clinical ramifications of a particular intervention? And we now have signs from research that show that indeed taking precursors, particularly in midlife and beyond, have a meaningful effect. So if we look at the skin first, since we've talked about that so far, we see that it helps skin age more gracefully. It has been shown that it helps make older skin look better. It supports the natural barrier, especially for skin, especially after sun exposure. And so there are a variety of technical things that researchers will look at to then assess the quality of skin. But the main idea is that you see older people, midlife people, that take this product and their skin looks younger than it did before. And that is both under the microscope, but possibly also what you can detect in the mirror. And you mentioned other things too. So some of the original research, the clinical research, was very interested in looking at the heart and heart health and physical performance. And we see that people that take NAD in some controlled clinical trials have their arteries stay flexible. So one thing that happens when you do get older is your arteries become more rigid. And the body then has a harder time getting blood flow to all the different parts of the body because they're less flexible. And so you see this improved blood vessel function, especially in older people, right? It makes them look younger, just like with skin. And so that's great. But there is some research that is showing that given NR or these precursors, and we could talk more about how to boost NAD levels, but when you try to then increase NAD levels, in endurance athletes, that you actually see that it supports their goals, even in physically trained people too. So you talked about performance, we talked about radiance, and if something is good for the body, we can look at something very specific like blood vessel flexibility. But it's likely, in many cases, not all cases, but it's likely going to have a positive effect at a lot of things that you look at. So sometimes what the research community is limited to in terms of what they study doesn't reflect the entire picture. That's why it would take sometimes decades to get even a better sense of all the different places that it's having an effect. But we can look at, for example, metabolism and energy and how our muscles use it. You mentioned that too. And yeah, we see that it helps with glucose uptake. It even activates gene expression in muscle tissue and helps to support liver fat balance, which is something that people in the midlife start to have more of an issue with, a distended stomach. They might even still be lean in many ways. Their subcutaneous fat is not increased, but they start to get more of a pooch. Visceral fat starts to increase in the viscera around the liver. This helps to suppress that. And it does so in a variety of ways, but it also improves insulin sensitivity in older adults, which is really something that is important, super important for healthy aging and also warding off, chronic disease. So yeah, and then you mentioned brain health too. So we see that it boosts the resilience of neurons, and it also seems to help with. You can detect higher levels in brain-related vesicles, so that when you give the precursors, you can actually see that they're getting into the brain. And that then links to improvements in memory related processes. So that's also really important, is like you have this goal of getting it into a particular tissue. Can you then sample that tissue in some way to see that it's actually getting to where you want it to go? And then from there, can you see that there's an improvement in particular clinical outcomes that you care about? And improvements in memory is definitely something that we care about, right? We want to stay sharp and be able to remember things as we get older. And it's also what it's nice too is that it's also very well tolerated in older people. So yeah, I mean, there's just a lot to discuss, but those are some of the bigger areas: metabolism, skin, heart health, brain, that have happened so far. But this is really just a beginning. There's more and more research that's happening on this topic. And it's one of the reasons why the aging community, or the community that is looking at geroscience, which is trying to modify the aging process, is so excited about this particular model. And you said very early in our discussion that it seems we have to look at what's foundational, and this could be a foundational strategy to age better.
Oh, I absolutely believe that supplementation with NAD is part of the foundation. And when you mentioned the fat distribution component, there's so many people that are going on GLPs now. And
Mm-hmm.
listen, everybody, we're now on the fourth generation of GLPs. It takes time to hone these types of things in. And my recommendation is focus on the foundations first. And NAD to me is a huge foundation. One of the number one questions and comments I receive from my clients online and also patients in the clinic is, I just want to get my spark back. And if we think about what NAD actually does, it helps the body make more energy. right? The higher voltage you are, the more that you can do what you want to do. You have more energy to do that. And I
Mm-hmm.
bet if, we even tested the voltage of the cells, and when someone is pre-NAD and then after, there's going to be more energy. So there's that frequency component
Mm-hmm.
in there as well, that higher operating system support and dialing in, which is great.
Yeah.
So now the question is, what's the best way to get NAD in the body? There's lots of different options, from IM injections to IV infusions. I'm a huge fan of your capsules. I find they're really easy to use, and I actually notice it. It actually, when I take NAD, it kind of feels like a gentle pre-workout. I can feel it working,
Mm-hmm.
usually within about 45 minutes of consuming it. So, in your opinion, what's the best form to actually get it in the body to overcome the decline that we know happens with aging? And why is potentially the oral route better than some of the other routes?
Yeah. I'd like to address this in two parts. You mentioned people wanting to get their spark back. And what we see is when you use different strategies to boost NAD. So, like you said, there's oral, there's IV, there's intranasal, there are patches. There's a lot of different routes for how you can attempt to do this, and we can discuss those. But imagine, before we get to that, the ability to actually increase the amount of NAD in every cell. You might feel an immediate boost in terms of, because your cells now have more time. Think of it like cabs that are moving energy around. It's hard to move, people around a city if there aren't any cabs or cars, right? Now you have more cars that do that, and it's enabling more interactions and more things that are going to occur. And that might be something that you feel right away. But there's another time component to this too, is that just when you enable more energy to be moved around a cell, now the cell can actually fix damage that's occurred over time. So there's a longer tail to this that could take, we don't actually know, but I would not be surprised if we saw continual improvements from a now higher sustained NAD level over 3 months, perhaps more. So not only are we slowing a decline, which, think about the challenges of there. How do you detect if you're at a point of life where there is a decline and you change the trajectory of that decline? That is actually a real challenge, right? Because then you have to compare yourself to somebody else and say, how am I doing relative to people my age around me? And how am I doing relative to myself previously? But anyway, there are some challenges there too. So now we see there's these two phases. There might be an immediate boost that you feel, but there's likely also an improvement that takes place over a stretch of time. Okay, so now let's get to, how do we do this? And there are a variety of ways to intervene in this system, and lifestyle has very powerful components. So first of all, we want to do things like get exercise and eat the right food and not stress the system. So one way to make NAD levels decline faster is to use it up more. And the more that we live out of balance by eating poor food, being sedentary, doing what's called social jet lag, where you go to bed at 3 a.m. one night and then 10 the next, and stuff that is really common, and then simply not getting enough sleep and a lot of environmental exposure, all of it, right? It's kind of daunting. All of that will cause your body to need more NAD, so it's consuming it faster too. All right, so that's like the general place to start, is how do
They're
we
like the
make
leaks of our energy. And then, of course, add, chaos of other people's life stuff that's happening, so that you need boundaries for that as well, too.
yeah. So we have this natural aging process, we could call it, but now we also have the way we live. And so just because you live well doesn't mean you're going to halt the aging process, because that's predetermined. Like we do have an arc to our life. And yet like we talked about before, you can still tell when somebody is 75 and fully radiant because they've lived in a way that's supported their health over decades. And now, okay, so those are the foundations. And what is exciting about the field of NAD and also just neuroscience in general is we're starting to look at ways to do even better than living well. And we don't want to undermine the value of living well. Sometimes because it's so common, yeah, get good sleep, eat well, exercise. We've heard it so much, we can forget how potent it is. But we are also very excited about how we go a step further. How do we take it to the next level? And there's legitimate science happening on that. And NAD was probably the first darling of this space. So you could argue if there's a couple different compounds there, but NAD is there for sure. All right. So now, how do we boost our levels? If you were to take, there's a variety of different ways to do that. And I think what I'll do is I'll talk about how we do it first, because the way that we try to approach creating a supplement is really through a systems biology approach. And what that means is that we appreciate the complexity of the human body, and we try to understand the different pathways by which we are trying to intervene on a particular area. So in this case, how do we improve NAD levels? Well, there's lots of different ways that it can be synthesized. There's different pathways. And so and then there's also the enzymes that are involved in the conversion. And then there's also our general metabolism. And so when we look at a problem, we say, how do we support this system across multiple different ways? And funny enough, you mentioned just a few minutes ago that we're now on the 4th generation of GLP-1 agonists. And the very beginning, the first one was, so GLP-1 is a gut peptide. And so we had things like semaglutide and Wegovy, and those are looking at one molecule working in the central nervous system mostly to then cause us to be less hungry. And what are the subsequent generations doing? They're looking to target this overall goal of eating less and staying really aligned with your energetic need with they're attacking it from more angles, not just increasing the dose of semaglutide. And what are we seeing? When you attack a problem from multiple angles, you're seeing even greater efficacy, which is why they're so exciting, right? So one that is in development right now is called retatrutide, and it's not yet on the market, but that has got 3 different pathways by which it's trying to target body fatness. We've taken that approach for years. How do we then target it from multiple angles? And the benefits of doing so is typically greater efficacy. It can have a sustained effect. And also, you can use less doses of the primary compounds. Instead of trying to force an effect by taking a very high dose of one thing, we're now trying to use more nuance in order to how to do that. And that's our general strategy. It's one that I find very appealing.
So. Yeah, it's so interesting where this is all going. And for those of you longtime listeners, you've heard me say that bodybuilders are the OG biohackers. But gone are the days of anabolics. We have the GLPs and the peptide stacks now to not only give the body energy to make those weights feel lighter and put on that muscle mass very quickly, but it's really this generation is totally changing the game. Yeah. However, I am going to say that before even looking at GLPs or peptide stacks, NAD is part of that foundation. And then you're dialed in, you add those things. When I add certain things, I'll feel it day 3. More cognition, more energy, better mood. There's a lot of things I do behind the scenes as well. Clearly, I'm a biohacking, research purposes only. This is not medical advice. If you think you have a medical condition, you must seek the guidance of a licensed physician. But I'd love for you to get into the research that validates why the Qualia NAD is superior in the marketplace. Because I love the research that you have, and I'd love for you to share with the audience.
Yeah. So you're right. Like one thing that we do, and which I'm very proud of as a company, is we use science through the entirety of the ideation, the development, and then the proof, the validation process. And that's exactly what you would want from a supplement company. So having a perspective, drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is how we think we get better results overall. And then researching it. The amount of research on every product is really impressive. So, as you know, I've joined the company recently, but I've been friends with the company for a long time.
And actually, Lauren from Qualia is one of my girlfriends. So
Yeah,
I got the inside scoop on these companies, everybody.
yeah,
And I'm very conscious of who I share products of to make sure that the team behind the company are like the nerdiest people possible.
it's good. It's smart.
That's what you want. You want super nerds within a company that are actually focusing on the research. So what are some of the like the key takeaways of the research of NAD on what it does for us?
Yeah, yeah. And I can come back and talk a little bit more about, because I talked more generally about our approach to looking at how to create a product around anything. And I can talk more specifically, if you'd like, about what we do with this specific product. But we've also, like I said, we've also now, we do research on, you should look for a company that tries to validate what they are selling to people. And we've now done 4 studies on this very topic. And that is something that, in fact, we just won a Science and Innovation Award from the Nutrition Business Journal, which I'm
Of course,
really,
Qualia did.
yeah. And, it's a big deal, but that prestigious journal in the space, it's been around for a long time. Noticed us and said, you guys are doing it right. And we got an award for it. And our CEO, James Schmachtenberger, received that about a month ago. And so, yes, you want to look at, not only do you want to create good formulations, but you want to validate that they work before you get them into the hands of people. So let's go through some of the human studies that we've done. And it all started actually with a product that is not Qualia NAD. The first pilot that we did looking at NAD levels was on our product called Qualia Mitochondria. And as you've indicated so far, about 70% of NAD in a cell is working inside the mitochondria. And when I remember being kind of astounded when I first learned this many years ago, but you think of organelles in a cell, right? You've got your nucleus and you've got your lysosomes and all of it. And I'm like, oh, you got your mitochondria. Actually, there are tens to hundreds of mitochondria in every
They
cell.
run the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 50% of your body weight is mitochondria. Whoa. And 70% of your NAD.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that 50% of my body weight was mitochondria. So here I am putting on 15 pounds of muscle. I'm ramping up my mitochondria firing. And I love your analogy of the cars as well. It's like New York won't run without the cars and the taxis taking everybody around. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, that's right. So when we stress our systems with exercise, what signal do we tell ourselves? Well, we need more energy, right? If you use a lot of energy, it tells your cells to make more. And that's really simple. In fact, one of the best things to think about for your listeners is that if you're tired, move. I know it's hard, but you have to tell your body to make more energy. And the tricky part is that we see on social media and elsewhere all of these inspirational images of people doing ridiculously hard things, but you don't have to do that if you're just getting started again. Go for a walk, right? Go walk up a slight incline of a hill and then come back and rest. And then the next day, go a little bit farther. Just listen to your body. Your body will tell you what it can do. What you'll find is after a few weeks, you've now already provided that signal to make more mitochondria, which are now making more energy, which now make you feel more energetic, which now enable you to do more things. Okay. So, Okay, so in this study, I'll go back to the study. This was a pilot study. It was 4 weeks. We had 10 adults, and there was a pretty big age range, so from 30 to 83. And with a lot of the Qualia products, not all of them, but with many of them, from the beginning, it was take them for 5 days and then take 2 days off on the weekends. And that's what we did in this study for this product. Blood was drawn at baseline, then at 5 days, and then again 4 weeks later. And so what we saw is that in whole blood, NAD levels doubled. And in plasma, NAD levels went up 69%. And remember, this formula had none of the precursors to NAD synthesis. So those gains likely came from indirect pathways. And the reason why that's so exciting is that these NAD increases were bigger than what we've seen, even when you just provide precursors like nicotinamide riboside. And so now you wouldn't want to then say, oh, you wouldn't want to provide precursors, but there are other avenues, which now gives you an insight into why we built our product the way that we did, that include that it's not just precursors, but it's also supportive systems too. So that was really insightful for us. And it then led to our next study, which was looking specifically at our product, Qualia NAD. And this was now twice the amount of people. So instead of 10, it was 20. Still a pretty big age range, but not quite the same. So 40 to 72 years old. And they took the product for 10 days. And then they reported on symptoms of like, how did you feel? Did you have any sleep issues? Were you fatigued? How about your mood? And this was before and after. And the results was pretty impressive. So the total symptom score dropped 50%, 56% in men and 59% in women. And what that means is that there's less symptoms. There's less symptoms of low mood and fatigue and low energy. And so not only do we see, yes, it improved levels this much in blood, but we're seeing people report that they were actually noticing a physical change in how they're showing up. That's really, really cool. Really, really cool.
Yeah. And one of the things that you alluded to was having sustained elevated levels of NAD in the body is going to be supportive of regeneration or rejuvenation. Give your body what it needs to rejuvenate itself when you're resting, when you're sleeping. And NAD is a huge component to add on to your foundation. You do all those things, maybe the GLPs and the additional peptide stacks are going to be helpful. One of the, my personal story with consuming the Qualia NAD is I like to take it with food, and I like to take it later in the AM. Some days I'll work out in the AM. Sometimes, usually it's in the afternoon. Sometimes I have enough energy to do twice a day, because the more I move my body, the less pain I feel and the more energy I have. And sometimes I'll get like a little bit of flushing, or like just like a very kind of slight rash, but I find that that's mitigated the later in the day. So late AM around noon, and have had food, and that's been really helpful. And it does feel a bit like a pre-workout. I really feel it, shortly after I take it, kind of like a pre-workout does.
Yeah.
And I remember once I took it in the evening, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go for a hike. I had so much energy. So that's how I take it. I take it earlier in the day, so that through the day I'm getting those energy benefits, say, without going to that third cup of coffee. I'll usually cap it too. Well, actually I do. So that's kind of my personal experience. And then I'm in this for the long game, right? Getting those long-term results of that ongoing and sustained energy to have my cells, to have my nervous system, to have my metabolism operating at this really dialed in high level. And you'll know that this is working when, say, you go to the gym and you've been, doing some shoulder presses, some RDLs, whatever, at a certain weight. And then you kind of look at that other weight that's a little bit heavier, and you're like, I think I'm going to go for it, because things start to feel lighter. So the more NAD and the more energy that we have in our bodies, it's almost like this overarching, things start to feel lighter because your body has more energy. So it has a greater capacity. in like a very generalized overview of how this can really change your life and how it changes mine. I'm super curious about your personal story. For me, I prefer to take the NAD in capsules.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that they'll get it through IV infusion and they get the stomach upset and things like that. The patches, I've used the patches as well. You have that residue from the adhesive, I mean, I do feel it, but I feel it the most
Yeah.
with the NAD product, like pretty quickly. And then, of course, you can inject it if you're taking
Right.
NAD through peptide format, but then there's the barrier with that too.
Yeah.
So I think that the easiest way to get it is in capsule form, which you've been able to do. What's your personal story with adding NAD into your life?
Yeah, no, those are really good comments because there are these all these ways. I'll just address like the different forms of how we can get it. Um, I don't think we have the benefit here of the oral form not only being the easiest and the least expensive, but in my mind, probably the best. If you look at, let's say, an IV infusion, so if you look at the levels of NAD from, let's say, baseline until after the infusion, so let's say a 6 hour period. First of all, you have to sit there for a very long time. It can be, thousands of dollars, or particularly do it over the course of a few weeks, and you'll see the levels go up by 4x. So really substantial increase. And then by 24 hours, they're back down. So it's only like maybe 16% above baseline, right? And then by, let's say, day 7, it's maybe only 8% above baseline. I don't totally understand why that method of boosting your NAD is better than causing an increase in it on a daily basis. Our bodies need NAD all the time. And nobody's really provided me with, like, no expert in the field has provided me with an argument for why we would want to even take it in that way. Because the way that IV NAD is typically given is that, maybe you do 5 or 6 treatments over a period of time. What's the argument for why that's better? I don't know it. Right. So that is something that the original research was looking at people who had alcohol dependence, and there might be some extracellular enzymes that are affected that help that particular population. So there could be rationales for specific populations about why you would take that form over another form. But again, taking whole molecule NAD and injecting it into your blood, it's not like the molecule's too big to get into your cells, right? It has to break down into the precursors anyway. And then it's got to be taken up into the cells. And then we use the salvage pathway, which is one of the biosynthetic pathways, to generate NAD levels. My whole point here is that, as I said it in the beginning, I don't know of any of the forms that are now being explored or utilized that are more costly and seem more sophisticated are better than what we have in a bottle that sits in your shelves that you can take each morning.
Yeah, and the Qualia NAD is one of the few products, I mean, aside from a specific peptide stack that I'm on now, I feel it like immediately, like
Yeah.
30 to 45 minutes later, I'll just like feel this energy going through my body. And I love that you said what you just said, because it's kind of like doing your dermal rolling or microneedling at home. I love to encourage 2 to 5 nights a week, as opposed to once a month for a package of 6 of microneedling in a med spa. You're
Mm-hmm.
keeping that sustained, controlled injury in the skin with microneedling, then putting great products on over top. I teach how to do that in tutorials.
Yeah.
Similar principle to consuming NAD regularly. In your study, you mentioned 5 days on, 2 days off.
Mm-hmm.
And so you nodded to that. So that's still the recommendation there.
Well, that was the original Qualia mitochondrial
Because
product.
I just take it every day.
Yeah. So the new NAD product is designed to be taken daily, and that is how I take it. And the whole point of going through the different methods, like IV versus oral, is that we do want to try to increase our NAD levels every day. Think about all of those 2 billion reactions per cell. Those levels have declined, and we want to try to increase them. And so there isn't necessarily a rationale for why you would take it periodically. Some compounds do have an excellent rationale for why you would take them occasionally and not every day. But others, it's the opposite is true, right? You want to actually take it on a daily basis. And that is how this product has been designed. So yeah, you have to, of course, not everything needs to be taken all the time. In this case, this one has been designed specifically to take it every day.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that clarification, because NAD is foundational
Yeah.
to my foundation. And that's why I'm so excited to have you here on the show to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you listening, head on over to qualialife.com/radiance15. And that's qualialife.com/radiance15. Use code radiance15, and that's actually going to get you 15% off any purchase. And I love your Life product as like this general multivitamin. You also have a joint and soft tissue product. You have a mind product, which is incredible. It's like having a carafe of coffee for the cognitive function. You have gut support. You have so many incredible products. And I trust your company because of your rigorous third-party independent studies that you do, and also having known the company for many years now. So that link is in the show notes of today's episode. And you can also find a lot of my other recommendations on my biohacking page at theschoolofradiance.com. And I'm so happy to have been able to do a focused episode on NAD with you, obviously with Qualia, which I would say is, from the NAD supportive supplementation side of things, the leader in the space. So thank you so much for what you do. And I'm curious, Dan, do you have any closing remarks here, words of encouragement, tips for NAD, any closing remarks here?
Yeah, I do. I didn't answer a question that you asked because, gosh, there's so much for us to talk about, right? It's such a rich subject. We scratched the surface, but we covered a lot of great areas. And you did ask about my experience with it. And honestly, going into it, with certain products, you take them because you believe the science, but you don't know if you're going to feel or experience anything at all. And that's okay. I mean, it's harder for a person to sustain something that they don't know is working. And particularly if something is working only on a time scale where it's slow, you feel it slowly over time. You have what I call the meaningful but invisible. Because it's slowly benefited you over like a 6 or 8 week period, you acclimate to that new feeling and you forget what you felt like before. You forget what your skin looked like. You just show up differently and you're like, oh, this is how I am. And yet you've had a 15% boost in, all these different factors, right? So that's a challenge that we all face as supplement consumers, is if it doesn't offer immediate feedback. However, I did notice something, and I was maybe a little surprised. So I know that for me, I've always been this way, but I recover slowly after exercise. So if, let's say, somebody who is my size and weight and age were to do a workout, and they were, not me, but someone else, I feel like I would recover from that workout a little bit more slowly than that individual. And I've always felt that way. And I started to notice that when I was taking this regularly, that I was recovering much better. And I was able to then get more workouts in. In fact, my recovery was so slow at times that it was frustrating me, because I would have wanted to get another workout in the week. And I was like, I don't think I'm quite ready to hit it again. And I started to feel younger. That's the best way to describe it, because of course our recovery ability is younger when is faster when we're younger. We all know what kids, they hurt something and then it's like they're made out of rubber and then they're back to new by the next morning. And so that was really impressive to me. And I connected the dots just a few weeks after taking it. And I was like, wow, this is having a really potent effect on something that I've monitored closely for a long time. So that is what I'd want to leave people with. That's my personal experience, which motivates me to talk about this product, right? Because the science is cool, the history is cool, the research is growing and interesting. But at the end of the day, we're helping people live a little bit of a different life within their life, right? There are trajectories that we're on, and you're shifting that trajectory to extract more life in your years. And I am really motivated to keep getting the word out.
Yeah, that vitality and what you're alluding to is resilience, right? So when life happens, you got to recover, whether that's from an emotional perspective, a physical perspective, all of these things. And muscle is the longevity organ. And for you to share that NAD also helped you recover faster between working on different body groups at the gym, I think that's also great information as well. And, that's something that I've had to rework into my routine with recovery after injuries. So, yeah, lay the foundations, add the NAD, do those foundational things first before going to that bright, shiny object syndrome of, say, GLPs, especially with the information that you shared of fat and fat retention in the body, because that visceral fat, that fat around the liver, that fat around the heart is what we know is terrible for us for aging. So thank you
Yeah,
so much, Dr. Dan Pardi from Qualia, the Chief Health Officer, for being here on the show and shedding light on this topic of, does NAD help us feel and look younger? And my consensus is yes, it's actually part of the foundation of that main driver, that main goal, which is why most of you are here, is to both look and feel your best. And it's supporting your cellular machinery so that you can operate at a higher level and radiate more. By having this beautiful additional voltage in your system, we lose that spark as we age. Now you know why we lose that spark. It's that declining NAD levels. Now we have the research to kind of explain that. Why do I feel a little sluggish as I get a little bit older? Well, it's your NAD, it's your body's voltage, it's the joule output, it's the amount of joule and ATP that's in your body. So hopefully this gave you some answers to help you overcome that sense of fatigue, that sense of tiredness, to give you something to be supportive of you on your journey of showing up as your most beautiful, attractive, magnetic, gorgeous version of yourself for not only now, but for many more years to come. And we also alluded to the impact of the sustained usage of NAD for that regeneration and that rejuvenation, and also utilizing it more consistently, like that example of dermal rolling at home 2 to 5 times a week instead of just once a month in the clinic, keeping that sustained rejuvenation and regeneration and cellular support is it's what I do, and give it a go. So head on over to, again, qualialife.com/radiance15. Use promo code radiance15, and that's also in the show notes. Thank you so much, Dan Pardi from Qualia, for joining us here on the School of Radiance podcast. And I look forward to connecting with you all again. Check out the show notes on other ways that I can support you in your skin and rejuvenation journey through masterclasses, through one-on-one sessions, through tutorials, and of course the membership deep dive on some other things I do behind the scenes that help me show up as my most beautiful radiant version. And if I can do it, you can do it too. Thank you so much, Dan Pardi, for joining us here on the show today.
Thanks so much, Rachel.